Let's start with the big story that we are tracking on WION at this hour, where the Belarusian strongman President Alexander Lukashenko has said that he will not remain in the post that he has held for more than 26 years if the country were to adopt a new constitution. The President Lukashenko has confirmed that he'll be stepping down once there is another constitution that would come into force. However, he has not described the kind of amendments that he's seeking for, nor has he given a timeline for the adoption of the new constitution.
Никакую конституцию я под себя не делаю. В новой конституции я уже с вами президентом работать не буду. Поэтому успокойтесь, спокойно это переносите.
Now, the Belarusian strongman leader has repeatedly raised the prospect of a new constitution since the 9th of August presidential election, in which he had won a sixth straight term. Now, Lukashenko has promised to reform the constitution to reduce the powers of the president. Now, the Belarusian president has been facing some terrible backlash from the opposition that has alleged that the 9th of August election was actually rigged. Protests and demonstrations have rocked the streets of the Belarusian capital Minsk since the 9th of August. The opposition views the talk of constitutional reforms as nothing more than a delaying tactic that is aimed at weakening the momentum of the protests. The Belarusian authorities have called for a National Assembly of People by January 2021 to discuss the proposed constitutional changes. All right, now to give us more insights in terms of what's actually happening in Belarus, we're joined in by Fred Weir, who is a Russian affairs expert. He's joining us live from Moscow. Now, Mr. Weir, let me begin by asking you this. This is rather, some would say, an unexpected kind of announcement by the Belarusian president, where he said that he wants a new constitution in place, and once that is in place, he will resign. Is he sincere in what he's saying?
Well, it is what he's been saying for 3 months, and it was his immediate response to the protests. It was his way of taking the wind out of them by promising, okay, well, you want a more democratic constitution, less powerful presidency. Well, let's amend the constitution. Then in the fullness of time, we'll have fresh elections. He's just been reiterating that, and I suspect the reason he is reiterating it yesterday is because he had a visit from the Russian foreign minister, Sergei Lavrov, who pressured him to get on with that constitutional reform. Sad to say, it's not so much the protests in the street, which have been waning. They never picked up steam, after the protest leader, Svetlana Tikhanovskaya, threatened a general strike. When that strike never materialized, the protest movement had effectively failed, sad to say. And so it's the Russians who are sick and tired of Lukashenko, who are twisting his arm and telling him to move ahead with this constitutional reform. And they're probably doing a lot more behind the scenes to design a new system of power in Belarus to maybe move Lukashenko to some other post. You know, there's a union state between Russia and Belarus, which has its own apparatus of parliament, a whole government structure. It's been there for over 2 decades. So possibly Lukashenko would be given some job in that. But this is Russian pressure for him to move ahead.
All right.
Because they want him out.
Absolutely. Now, I'll just talk to you a bit about why Russians would want to see Lukashenko out. But the question that I want to ask you is, he's talking about a new constitution and constitutional reforms. At this point of time, do we know of any details at all as to what kind of amendments he's actually looking for in the new constitution for him to step down? Is he looking at some kind of an immunity clause where even after he steps down, he cannot be prosecuted for anything that he's done while he's been in power since 1994? He
hasn't, I mean, we do not have those details. It's one big thing that's wrong with this protest and out of this proposal of Lukashenko's. He isn't putting forward any details, but the idea would be a different power structure, perhaps a more parliamentary state, and no doubt it would contain clauses that protect former presidents. That seems to be a rather fashionable thing to do in this part of the world these days. So But I think the main thing would be some new job. Lukashenko would leave while still very much staying. I think that would be the basic idea behind all this activity.
All right, now you've been following the happenings in Russia so very closely. So the question I want to ask you is, why do you think the Russians would want to see Lukashenko to be shunted out of power in Belarus?
Because he's been a major pain in the neck to them all the time. They want to move ahead with this union state. As I said, it exists, but mainly on paper. Russia wants, for instance, that Russian capital should be allowed to invest in Belarusian industry. That's been prevented by Lukashenko. He controls the Belarusian economy and uses it for his own paternalistic purposes. The Russians are getting quite frustrated with that. Another thing Lukashenko has done, especially over recent years, is play footsie with the West. He plays that game of promising to be Russia's best friend and then turning around and accepting aid and other kind of cooperation with the West. He's very much, from the Russian point of view, unreliable partner, and they're clearly they're fed up with him.
Right. My last question to you is, how long do you think this transition would actually take place? Because Lukashenko has been in power since 1994. That's about 26 years. It doesn't look like he's given a timeline as to how soon he would want to step down from his presidency. But do you foresee any kind of a timeline that the Belarusian president would like to follow here?
I think he'd like to drag it out as much as he possibly can, but as you see, he is under pressure. I think that was probably the main subject of his conversations with Sergei Lavrov in Minsk yesterday. So I would guess, and this is just off the top of my head, within a year.
All right, we'll have to leave there. Thank you very much indeed for joining us and getting us all those updates, Mr. Fred Weir. Thank you very much.